Have you ever encountered true evil? How? I've told this story before, about meeting a murderer. Was a journalist on weekend duty. Got called out to a story. Guy claims his car was hijacked with his 2-year-old son in it. I met him at the police station. He seemed devastated. I was devastated. I'd done plenty of grisly crime stories, but a missing kid is next level awful. Next day I had my day off. The regular crime reporter called me. They'd arrested the dad and found the little boy's body at a rubbish dump. He did it out of revenge for his wife cheating. It still bothers me to this day how I could have felt so much sympathy for this man. I shook his hand. I cried with him. I'm usually very good at picking up when someone is off. Just goes to show you, true evil disguises itself very well. Back in 2011, my uncle down in Mexico had got kidnapped by one of the cartels. They gave my entire family on my dad's side a random $10,000 and we would get him back. My dad called in people who owed him money and managed to get the 10 grams. He sent it down to the family down south and they paid the ransom for my uncle. All we got in return was my uncle's lifeless body. A few years ago, a friend of mine was going through a nasty divorce. Like really bad. He came to visit me one evening as I was getting off of work. When I sat down with him, he just seemed off, like a completely different person than the man I had known before. Blank stare in his eyes, no smiling, anger behind everything he said. I chalked it up to the divorce and just thought to myself that he would get better when everything calmed down. I told my wife when I got home about seeing him and she agreed with my assessment. I bumped into his ex-wife and some friends a few days later at another work event. She was actually out celebrating their divorce being finalized, I think, and she invited my wife and I over to a house party. That would be the last time I saw her. My wife and I ended up not going to the house party, but the ex-husband did show up. He killed 9 people, including his ex-wife. In Iraq there was a family that we would go see every other week or so while on patrol. We would ask them how things are going and if there was anything they needed us to do. They were a respected family in the area and did a lot to build their community to defend against the violence committed by the insurgency. It was a big family, lots of kids, 3 wives. They were good people just trying to better their community. Their house just happened to be on a road that was kind of a border between Al-Qaeda-controlled territory and coalition-controlled territory. One day we were patrolling the road as we did several times per week. And we came across a hole that had been blown into the road, making it impassable by vehicle. We turned around and got back onto the road a few miles further down and encountered another hole just like the first. The holes were about 2 miles apart and effectively created a corridor for Al-Qaeda fighters to cross the road more freely. We dismounted to get to the family's house. Everyone was on edge. Once we arrived at the house, it was immediately noticeable that something was wrong. It was silent and there was a smell surrounding the house. Inside was the most terrible thing I have ever seen. The entire family was gathered into the central room of the house where they were all tortured, raped and murdered. There was maybe a half-inch of blood that was congealing on the floor. If you looked at the scene, you could tell the order that it all happened. The father was killed last, the daughters were unclothed and laying face down, the mother and baby were killed with 1 bullet at the same time. By the time we had arrived, they had all been dead for 2 or 3 days already. I think about this every day and I've had to stop to cry 3 times just to write it out. My stepmother's 6-year-old nephew is showing all the signs of being a sociopath and a sadist. He has severely physically harmed several students in his school, including trying to drown a classmate in the toilet several times. He once tried to strangle a little girl. He locked his older sister in a metal garden shed with a padlock for 4 hours in 100-degree weather and lied about it when asked. The police were called because his mom thought it was a kidnapping. They heard the girl screaming and released her. Their dog had puppies and they kept one. He slammed the dog's head in a car door, killing it. He routinely holds a lit lighter to his body, including his genitalia. He enjoys hurting others. These people live in the mountains, and to get from their house to town they have to come down the mountain, so a road that is on the edge of the mountain. The little boy unbuckled himself, as his mom was driving around a bend where there was a 200-foot drop on the other side, and put his hands over her eyes. More recently he found a belt with a metal buckle and started beating a neighborhood kid with it. One morning his mother came into the kitchen to get breakfast ready and found him hiding behind the doorway with a large knife. She dodged just in time as he swung at her. Even more recently his aunt gave birth to a new baby. My step-aunt woke to go get the baby for a feeding and couldn't find him. They looked everywhere. The 6-year-old was watching with a smile. They eventually found the baby in the dryer, asleep but sweaty. The boy regularly physically attacks his mother and sister, leaving them bloody and bruised. A few months ago I went up for stepmom's birthday and the little boy was present. We were all staying the night at the house. He spent the whole day being sweet and loving towards me, until nighttime, when suddenly he stared at me with these horrible emotionless eyes and told me he didn't like me anymore and wanted me to leave. He then went around the hall and stared at me for a while. I didn't sleep that night. My kids went to visit their mom in the UK on a court-ordered visit. I knew what was going to happen but couldn't prevent the visit. Sure enough, rather than put them on a plane back to me in the USA, she went on the run with them and her boyfriend. I got a lot of help from the Center for Missing and Exploited Children, the US State Department, and the Scottish government paid all my legal fees over there. During the 5 months she had the kids, she tried to brainwash them. She told them if they came back to me, I would allow them to be molested, and kill them. This was relentless. My son was incredibly strong and refused to believe her or cooperate. They were 13 at the time, but my daughter was much easier to manipulate. I really don't know for certain that they weren't physically abused, but a lot or the stuff she accused me of, was things she and her then boyfriend, now husband, did to the children. I had to fly to Scotland to appear in a trial. I walked out of the courthouse at 9 p.m. on a Friday night with the children. Normal process for these cases is to have a designated handover 2 or 3 days later, but the child psychologist who interviewed us all was positive that my ex-wife would kill the children, and the judge agreed. I got them back in the clothes they stood in. I have no doubt she would indeed have killed them rather than hand them over to me. 5 years later, she has no contact with the children, their choice. They have anxiety and depression, but are doing remarkably well. They are high school seniors now, and they make me proud every day. When I was a boy, I had a wicked stepmother who reveled in beating me. She would beat me when my father was not present, threatened to kill my brother if I said anything. She would use whatever objects were convenient to beat me with. Wooden spoon, hair brush, dowel rod, rolling pin, her hands, fists, belt, whatever. One time she used a serpentine belt. She'd hit me where it wouldn't be visible when my father wasn't around. At one point, she had me drop my pants and underwear, and beat me until I nearly passed out. I jerked/tensed out of pain and kicked off of her lap, and kicked her in the face. She proceeded to pick me up by my leg and beat my balls with a wooden spoon. I'm not sure if she counted as evil, but she certainly counted as sadistic and vindictive. My birth mom was abusive. She beat my brother mercilessly and let her boyfriend molest him. She ignored all of us daughters. Went days without eating. There was a kid in my 6th grade class who loved designing his own custom shanks and then stabbing people in the arm or back with them. He had a look of pure joy on his face when he saw that he drew blood and caused suffering to another human. He was only suspended for a week the first 2 times he did this before they finally kicked him out of school after the 3rd time. I used to work with a woman years ago who was estranged from her husband. The day before her husband was going to take their daughter to Disney World, she smothered her daughter with a pillow and then tried, unsuccessfully, to kill herself. I worked with a guy in Ontario who was always posting on Facebook that he just adopted new puppy like every 4 or 5 months. He adopted them from all different shelters and people. Had to have about 8 or 9 at one point. We went to his house for some reason and there were no dogs. No signs of dogs, no toys, no food bowls, etc. We asked about the puppies and he just offhandedly pointed to the backyard, which we noticed was full of little mounds, and said they all were sick and died. Guess he just didn't have good luck with animals. The way he said it was cold. The CSPCA investigated him and tested the remains. He was putting small amounts of his own homemade poison in the dog food and conducting his own little LD50 test. I haven't, but I think my girlfriend has. She works at a preschool/daycare. Ages of children vary from infant to 5. She teaches the 3-year-olds in her part of the building. She told me that there is this one 3-year-old girl that is just a heathen. She literally only wants to hurt people. One day she got in trouble for hitting kids on the head with pots and pans, They use these in the sand pit for fun. She brought the little girl inside to talk to her, and the entire time she is just not listening. Mid-sentence the little girl looks at my GF dead in the eyes and says, "Can you let me go outside so I can hit more people?" The next day she was expelled because she just kept hitting kids in the head with pots and pans. Laughing about it. How do you get expelled from a preschool? I worked the same job and I knew this girl from roughly age 3 to 7, and she is the only person I can confidently say is a sociopath and is a genuinely scary person. She'd coerce people into picking fights with each other, lie, steal, and break things so others couldn't use them. She also had her parents believing she was innocent and perfect, and seeing the way she acted around them I could see why. The worst was when I caught her watch two boys, she got to fight each other, with the most satisfied look I'd ever seen. I pulled her aside and asked her why she'd set them at each other, and she played dumb and innocent. I eventually told her I wasn't buying her sweet act essentially, and I'd never seen anyone's face go that emotionless so quickly before. She basically said, "What are you going to do about it?" And like literally what could I do? Timeout did nothing, taking her things away did nothing, telling her parents did nothing. It's been about 6 years since I saw her, so she's in middle school now, and I sometimes wonder if she's still the same. I felt like my aunt was pretty evil, and she was a kindergarten teacher no less. She pulled my arm out of its socket one time when I was 4 and she was helping me cross the road. I visited her when I was 16, and every opportunity she got she would whisper in my ear, "You are worthless. You are nothing. And just keep walking." The visit ended with her trying to strangle me after I took issue with her trying to force feed my brother Ginger, and that was the last time my family spoke to her. I remember fantasizing about getting back at her in some way for a while, but then moved on with my life and grew up. Years later, she was being her typical self with my uncle, her brother, and berating him, calling him worthless, and he shot her in the head, killing her. It was a real tragedy for the family as he shot himself afterwards as well, but I certainly have not missed my aunt. The first boyfriend I ever had, we were both 16. He was a pathological liar and a sociopath. He slowly became possessive and controlling, wanted to be together constantly, would accuse me of wearing things that were too revealing, isolated me from my friends. When I tried to break up with him, he threatened to rape me and kill my dog. He pushed me out of a slowly moving car while his grandmother was driving. I was dumb as a box of rocks and had no self-esteem, so I didn't know any better. I nearly changed schools, my parents put me in therapy among other things. He ruined the first 2 years of high school for me. Over 20 years later he sent me a message on Facebook asking me how I was, like we were old effing pals. I didn't respond. Maybe he changed as an adult, but I seriously doubt it. I found out he died a couple years ago. He was involved in a crime involving his young daughter, and I'm pretty sure he was facing prison time. My husband has. I've wrote about it before, so I copied and pasted. My husband's little sister was 9 and he was 12. He also had 2 girl cousins close in age as well. His uncle raped and killed his sister after killing his aunt. That night when my husband went to the bathroom, he didn't shut the door all the way and the uncle was watching him through the crack. Turns out his sister was folded and put into the bathroom cabinet, and had my husband walked to the back of the bathroom, the uncle would have killed him as well. The uncle went on the run that night, and the next day, my husband and his cousins were playing hide and seek, and my husband ended up pulling his aunt with her head 3/4 of the way off, up from behind a futon. She was wrapped in a carpet. My husband is doing pretty well now. He obviously has PTSD, but he is a great dad, a little overprotective, but that's understandable, and a great husband to me. He is a hard worker and super loving. He has had a miserable life up until we got together 16 years ago. But he really is amazing. He loves with all of his heart. I really am a lucky woman to have a guy like him with the heart he has. Please tell me the uncle is in jail or dead. He is on death row in San Quentin. But he will die of natural causes long before he gets executed. I've spent a lot of time volunteering in a prison, as a teacher. Every one of my students are good people who made bad decisions and are paying their debt. I've never thought of them as evil. Except for one student. Very intelligent man. Serving time for killing his wife in a particularly heinous way. In casual conversation, he refers to her as his ex. Like, my ex and I went to Greece once. I was shocked the first time I heard him do it. She's not your ex-wife, man. She didn't divorce you. You chopped her to pieces. Closest thing to casual evil I've ever seen. I haven't encountered it, but my aunt's side of the family has two brothers that are corrupted policemen in China. While on his deathbed, the father's ankles were twisted in an attempt to get the inheritance money quicker. She doesn't talk to her brothers anymore and cut contact after the father passed. F those two, I hope some sick sadistic crap happens to them when they least expect it. I went to jail and prison for marijuana charges. There was this guy in there who had kidnapped, tortured, and raped two 12-year-old girls. This guy did a couple years and got released. He came back in a little after his release. He had gone to one of the girls' workplace, a fast food joint, and started harassing her, trying to touch her. Police came and arrested him there. This F did not care about the damage he did to these girls. And he had the most evil intents. He didn't want them to die. He just wanted them to hurt. He died in that jail under some dubious circumstances.